What I'm interested in finding out, I guess, is you guys have had an emergency plan for a while, and you've had to employ it some with COVID, correct?
Yes, we have. We established our plan. I'm thinking the first time that I got involved in a plan was about 8 years ago.
Mhm.
And we have, you know, thankfully not had to employ it too often. But when we have, it's been helpful to have guidelines and standards, and you know exactly what to do in the general sense. Each crisis is different, but yeah. So most recently, we had to roll it out for COVID.
So you didn't have a previously written message for pandemics, right? You have to come
Yeah,
up with those on the fly.
strangely, that wasn't in my playbook. I never thought about it, actually. Didn't even think, I don't know if I even knew the word pandemic other than, from maybe some horror movies from the past.
Yeah, I think that's all of us. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you had a plan in place, and did you periodically go back and revise it or do any kind of a drill with it or anything, or how did it work before this?
We never did a drill with it. What we did was once we wrote it, and we had several folks on our leadership team review it and give some input on, the types of scenario planning that we would want to do for a communications plan. Once we did that, we would have to update it, particularly if positions changed on a leadership team or in another place where we had to intersect with the plan, because we wanted to keep it as up to date as possible. We are very thorough in the plan in terms of even things down to the various leaderships, email addresses and cell phone numbers and that kind of thing. So we wanted to make sure that that was kept up to date.
Who's responsible for that at Wycliffe?
I am, as Chief
Okay.
Communications Officer.
Okay, so do you kind of have a calendar item every year that just reminds you to update it, or what do you do?
That's exactly what we do. We just kind of, oops, sorry, my mic just fell back. We ping, it kind of pings me once a year to just take a look at the plan, and I take a look at it, see what may have changed in our ecosystem, see if we need to update any of our scenarios, see if we need to add any or change any of our current staff that would be brought into the plan if necessary to mobilize it. So,
Yeah. So you kind of rolled it out last March, I assume, or whenever, you decided to take that step. What did it look like? And did it kind of go as you expected it would to roll it out, or were there surprises?
it was interesting. We started talking about this thing called COVID-19. I believe it was the second week. No, it was prior to then. I think we were kind of watching it go from China to some other countries. We knew that this was a thing out there. We had heard from various colleagues around the globe that, this thing may be coming to the US, very likely will be. At the time, we didn't know what it was. I remember actually being on a business trip for Wycliffe, flying from Orlando to California. I was going to a conference in San Diego. I believe it was the second or third week of February. And I recall looking at a woman coming on the plane, going from Dallas to San Diego after I had had a little stop there first. And she had on a mask. And I thought, wow, this is weird. And I didn't know if she was sick or whatever. And then somebody kind of whispering around said, she's probably worried about this COVID-19 thing. And so anyway, that was sort of my last ability to ignore it.
Yeah.
And by the time I got back, we knew that this was possibly, going to be a growing concern, had no idea what was about to hit us really. But by the second week of March, we were shutting down the Orlando office and having to full on employ a crisis plan.
Yeah. Tell me how you relied on your plan at that point. And, I know there's things you have to fill in because every circumstance is different, but did it give you a roadmap?
It did. Yeah, that's a really good way to put it, Jim. It did give us a roadmap because I felt like, okay, I know we've got something here that we've been planning for. We haven't really had to roll it out lately. And so let's take a look. There wasn't anything specific to a pandemic, as we mentioned, but there were principles in there that let me start thinking through with with my boss, our COO, how are we actually going to think about each piece of a plan that we had, different scenario plans for, and how do we need to employ this? So that's kind of it. It was nice to have it. It was nice to know it was there. Did it 100% cover us? Absolutely not, because we did not have a pandemic in our plan. And I don't know that I'll need to do it again, have a pandemic in our plan, because, prayerfully, that's not going to happen again.
What's a specific thing or two from your plan that you had to employ last year?
Well, what we had to do, first of all, was to do an assessment of the situation. So as best we knew at the time, and I have to kind of take my mind back to March, because things were so different. It's like, wow, it was almost a year ago. But the principles did hold for the plan. One of the first things we had to do was do just kind of an assessment of where we were, what's going on, who's involved, who do we need to bring into this, and everything. And so I met with our CEO and COO at the time and said, okay, here's the basic information that we know right now. We believe that it's prudent for us to pick a time soon, like within the next few days, where we do shut down the office, because we've got to start preventing the spread of this disease even within. And we knew so little at the time about even how it spread. I remember our very last event was the week that we were shutting down. And it was a scripture celebration in our large Tivoli auditorium with, a couple hundred people were in there, but people were already starting to get a little nervous about COVID. I didn't see a lot of handshaking. We were staying distanced from one another, but didn't wear masks at the time. And I remember thinking, wow, I wonder if we're ever going to be back together again in any, will it be a month? Will it be 6 weeks? That's what we were thinking at the time. So
Yeah.
How naive we were. But what we did was we immediately pulled together a team that was going to be our COVID response team.
Mm-hmm.
And that was appointed by our COO. She appointed a team that consisted of our executive VP over global projects. So Andy Keener led the team. And then she also appointed Dr. Keith Campbell, who is on our global health services team out of Wycliffe, he works very directly with SIL. And a lot of our seconded staff work for SIL, obviously, and other places. And then myself as the Chief Communications Officer and Executive VP over several of the other areas in the building, including communications. So it was the three of us that she said, I want you three to be the core team. Keep me updated. So we met as a team for the first time and started talking about all of the different things we needed to plan for, and started doing, we put together Google documents that we would work from. We had set agendas. We met, and we continue to meet actually twice a week. We meet for at least an hour to discuss where are we currently, what do we need to be working on, what are the issues that have come up in the meantime, and how are we going to move forward.
You had to deal with getting people home right away too, right?
That was one of our first things.
Yeah.
Once we knew we were going to get people out of this office, we also needed to deal very soon with the situation globally. We had staff, obviously, in locations all over the globe. And how do we do a health assessment on who's there? How do we determine who needs to get on an airplane right away because they were at the highest risk for this disease, as we knew it at the time? What do we use to determine what their risk level is? How do we know, do they have good health care where they're located now? Is it smarter for them to actually be in place during a quarantine situation. Because remember back then, we didn't think it was going to last terribly long, maybe 6 to 8 weeks at the outset.
Right.
Still it was a problem because we needed to look out for their health. But yeah, all of that came into play. Are there planes flying out? You know, at that time, certain areas of the world were shutting down.
Mm-hmm. So a year into this, or almost a year into this, as you look back, what do you know now that you wish you had known a year ago about the crisis plan process and how it works?
That's a great question. I think because we had a plan in place for at least 8 years that we continued to update and we continued to think about, and like I always go back to the principles of a crisis. You know, what are you trying to solve for, and how are you trying to separate what needs to continue to happen with day-to-day operations of an organization of our size and separate that from this crisis that you're dealing with. And so I will say there's not a lot that I look back on and say, gosh, I wish we would have done something different. I wish we would have had better information at times, but nobody had better information.
Don't we all?
Yeah. You know, and that's what I was just like, golly, you know, you can always look back and, you know, we laugh, look back with 2020 vision and know what you were going to do in the year 2020. But it wasn't as simple as it seemed at times. And there were a lot of times when we would be frustrated as a team with not being able to move as quickly as we wanted to. It was a lot of moving parts. It was a lot of unusual hours that had to be kept, because at times we were actually needing to connect with the field staff, and we didn't want to inconvenience them with our time zone. You know, we wanted to be very cognizant of the fact that they're also dealing with a crisis on the ground. And so we would sometimes start our days at 4 a.m, our time, and let the folks on the ground, depending on where they were, sometimes it would be 10 o'clock at night their time. And so it was really, I would say, of the things that made it tough, it's always the challenge of dealing with a global organization of time zones. Mm-hmm. And hitting people, you know, either early in the morning when they're not really fully awake, or late at night when they're really tired and they're having to deal with these really important, almost, I would say, life and death situations. So we were all running and gunning, and you know, it was funny because our team we would often laugh because people would be like, "Oh, I've got so much time on my hands now. We've got, you know, with COVID, you're home," and our team would be like, "Don't tell us that. We don't have a moment to breathe hardly." There would be days when I would wonder how many times I'd gotten up from my kitchen table.
Yeah.
But it was worth it. It was worth it. I feel like we did a really a good job with God's help and a lot of prayers. We prayed for wisdom. That's how we would open our meetings, just praying, you know, God, you know, open our eyes to see what we need to see, to guide us and direct us in every step that we're taking here, and don't let us do something foolish. You know, we were just really hoping that we could do the right thing in every case.
Nice. People watching this as a video will be alliance organizations that are, without exception, smaller than Wycliffe US. Can you talk a little bit about, or give some encouragement as far as having a plan together, no matter how small you are, no matter, you know, how isolated or how insulated you may feel from, well, I guess not COVID, that's a bad example because everybody's gotten hit by COVID, but you know, the things that would typically trigger a crisis plan.
Yeah, I think it's really important, no matter what size organization you are, to have a plan in place. There's a lot of comfort in it. When you get into a crisis, you are tempted, just in our humanness, to almost go into panic mode if you don't know that you've got that roadmap to guide you. And if you've thought about it in calmer times, you can pull it off the shelf and say, okay, we've got this. We know what to do. We know how to proceed. I would say that for sure. I would also say one of the interesting things about putting together a plan for your organization is you need to think through who needs to be included in that and who doesn't need to be included. That was really key for us, was to basically free up our CEO and our COO's time. So you need to look at your leadership team and say, who should be devoting the time to this and who should still be running the organization? Because you've still got to keep going on the one hand while you're dealing with the crisis. And it's really important who you choose as the team lead. You don't need that team to be too large because they need to be able to be nimble. But you also don't want everybody who thinks the same way. That's really key to it too. So as we were pulling together this team, it ended up being an interesting blend of our very wise doctor who needed to be a part of this for that. And he is a self-described nerd. He digs into the research. He really gets into that. I had my communications hat on. It was really important that I was there because I had to communicate not only internally, but we had a lot of questions from news media of how are you all handling this crisis? What can we learn from Wycliffe and that kind of thing. And then we had our head of global partnerships of, he knew very well, he had lived in the field, he had translated a Bible, he knew the feelings of our team on the ground, wherever they might be found. He could actually put himself in their shoes of wanting to stay put if they were able to. And so it was like this great three-legged stool. And I would say, whatever plan is put into place, you really need to consider the people involved in it and make sure that you've got people that will challenge one another, tell the truth to one another, but operate as a team.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thanks. I was thinking as you were just saying that there are, depending on the situation, there's a mix of internal and external focus on this thing too. And, a lot of this is staff care and a lot of this is, just helping your own people deal with something along with dealing with media. So I totally agree. You've got separate people that are good at both of those things, but rarely do you find one person that handles all of that.
That's very true. And that was a really important component to this plan. And I think almost any crisis also comes with that emotional component that you always have to be thinking about of how are we making sure that we care for our people well, particularly in a lot of crises, where there's a lot of emotion around it. There's a lot of pain for some families. In the case that, in the COVID case, and in a lot of other types of cases, if there's trauma involved of any type, we've certainly through COVID and through any kind of a crisis, a lot of the scenarios we've planned, there could possibly be a loss of life. There is a lot of emotion around that. You have people that we were dealing with who we would have to connect with, and they were dealing with their own personal issues with this crisis. They also had family members in some cases at home that they were dealing with. And so they're trying to manage a crisis with their own pain of the crisis happening. So that was really important to keep in mind as well. So to have the balance on the team and, as it worked out, if one person was down on the team, like just having a rough time, the rest of us could be encouragers and build them back up and kind of pray with them and just kind of really formed well together. And I would say you bond a lot through a crisis. You do find ways that you look forward to getting together and talking about it because you're friends after all of this.
Yeah, it's therapeutic, isn't it?
It is, because everybody's going through something very similar, and only the people on the crisis team know just what it's taking in terms of a personal toll on you serving on the team. So I would also say, talking about the emotional side, you need to make sure that anybody who's going to be plugged into the plan is emotionally healthy at the time, because it's a tough road and it's a tough assignment. And particularly when you think you're going to be in an assignment like with COVID for 6 to 8 weeks, and it continues to this day, you have to be able to be in it for the long haul, to reach out to people when you need them. And I will say also our counseling team has been very helpful for us to be able to not only be resources for us as a team, but also for people that we came across that were struggling with the crisis. We were able to point them to resources, which was also part of our plan.
Yeah, that's great. Good to hear. Vicky, this has been super helpful. Is there anything I should have asked you that I didn't?
The only thing I would say is, as you're forming a plan, any type of scenario planning, the most important thing is to list all the stakeholders that might be involved in a particular crisis. And that was the thing that helped us the most, because we had all of our stakeholders identified pretty quickly, of internal and external partners, everybody, family members, just kind of brainstorm everybody possible that might need to be communicated with. And it's really important that you have a solid communications plan that you're regularly looking at and saying, do we need to go back to this group? Do they have further questions? How do we keep an open door? And that was the other thing we did. We had a dedicated email address that people could write to if they had specific questions, and we would triage it every day to who needs to answer this question. So that would be the other thing I would say.
Yeah, it seems like the goal in this is to not ever have the conversation like, why didn't we have this 6 months ago, or that kind of thing, but to feel like you're as ready as you can be, absolutely not knowing what's coming, but to have at least groundwork done. That seems like a really wise thing.
The other thing that I didn't mention, but when a crisis affects one of our organizations, it really affects multiple organizations. So that was really key to our plan for this, and for, I would say, any crisis, because you need to keep your partners up to speed with what's going on with your own crisis.